Just as I shut my eyes, I heard the sound of her dagger sinking into flesh. However, it wasn't my flesh that her dagger sank into. Kimiki ga... Naze?
どうしてはこちらのセリフです。姫様と同じで、あなたも随分と無茶をなさいますね。
Sticking out from Kimikiku's ribcage was Sen's dagger, blood oozing from the entrance wound. At first glance, the wound wasn't fatal. However, watching Sen mindlessly drive her dagger into her old friend's abdomen was worrisome. Kimikiko was steadfast, biting her tongue to refrain from crying out in pain, and she smiled timidly.
姫は多くの人に慕われておりますが、鬼の一族の長という身の上ですから。立場上、心を許せるものは決して多くありません。あなたのお生まれもあるかもしれませんが、鬼と知ってなお姫様のことを友人と呼んでくださったのはあなたが初めてです。
Kimikiko's body wavered, and she let out one pained groan before collapsing to the ground.
ごめんね、大きく。
The light of insanity left Sen's eyes, replaced by a mournful gaze upon her old guardian.
バカな。真の羅刹となった者が鬼ごときの呼びかけで正気に戻るなど。もしかすると先ほど風間や君肉の血を舐めていたせいか。
どうでもよかろう。貴様が誇っていた羅刹の血とやらが別の何かに敗れた。ただそれだけのことだ。
黙りなさい。真なる羅刹が破れるなどあってはならない。ならないのです。
Sananson's eyes burned with an intense rage, directing his hateful gaze towards Sen and me.
いいでしょう。もし君たちとの絆が千姫を正気に戻したというのなら、ここにいる者全員、彼女を思う者も慕う者も知る者も全て殺し、羅刹を増やすためだけに存在する姫に仕立て上げるだけです。仮に失敗したとしても、純潔の鬼の姫はもう一人いますからね、雪村くん。
Sonasan was seething, crossing the threshold of insanity that meant no return for him. His eyes were fixed on me, and when he took a step towards me, Heisuke stood in front of me.
生きてる人間に手を出すなよ、三男さん。ここはやっぱりとっくに死んでる人間同士で決着つけようぜ。千鶴、下がっててくれ。
All right. Please be safe, Heisuke. I nodded, putting my full faith into him as I slowly backed myself against the wall in a secluded corner. From here, Heisuke's back had never looked taller, and he stood confidently in front of Sanan-san. Heisuke assumed his Seigan position, widening his stance. Seigan, an offensive sword stance categorized by the lowering of the knees and the pointing of one's blade towards their opponent. In the blink of an eye, Sanan-san and Heisuke lunged at one another. Heisuke attempted to sidestep Sanan, swinging his blade for Sanan-san's arm when...
遅いですね。疲れが出始めましたか。
はっ、これぐらいで疲れるはずねえだろ。あんたの方こそそろそろ寿命が尽きちまうんじゃねえのか。
ご冗談を。何のために私が人であることを捨てて血をすすり続けたと思っているのです。
Sana-san cocked his elbow back before stabbing out. The tip of his blade was driven into Heisuke's chest. Uh-oh. Heisuke!
以前言った通りではないですか。やはり君は何百回戦おうとこの私には勝てません。
Sana-san twisted his blade, digging it further into Heisuke's chest before turning to look at me.
どうしたんです、雪村君。恋慕う相手を殺されたというのに涙の一つも流さないのですか。
I stared resolutely back at him. I believe in Heisuke.
信じるも何も彼が死ぬのは時間の問題ですよ。
I steeled myself to refrain from panicking. Heisuke wasn't the type of person to back down so easily, and he'd survive tougher than this. There was no way Sanan-san would kill him now.
人を操る術を持つこの私が言葉では君の心一つ動かせないとはね。まあいいでしょう。東堂君が寂しがるといけませんから一緒にあの世へ送ってあげます。
Sana-san jiggled the hilt of his sword, which was still stuck in Heisuke's chest, to pull it out.
抜けない。
Sana-san grew agitated, staring back at Heisuke in shock. Before Sana-san had a chance to react, the tip of Heisuke's sword slid across the tatami mat, ripping it as he thrusted the blade upwards. It was aimed directly for Sanan-san's heart. Sanan-san lifted his left hand defensively, hoping to block Heisuke's feint attack, but he was too late. The blade in Heisuke's hand was jabbed directly into Sanan-san's heart, followed by the snap of his chest bone. Sanan-san spit up a mouthful of blood, his lips frothing. It dribbled down his chin, trickling into a wide spot on his chest, which by this time had been splattered by so much blood, his seemed indistinguishable.
見事でしたよ、東堂君。まさかこの私が先ほど君を仕留めようとした策で殺されるとはね。
昔のあんただったらきっとこんな方法じゃ殺せなかったと思うぜ。
それは買いかぶりというものですよ。私は弱い人間ですから。
そうかな。最後の一撃だって止めようと思えば止められたんじゃねえのか。
Sanan-san let out a derisive laugh under his breath.
止められませんでしたよ。 人だった頃のことを思い出したら左腕が動かなかったんです。
That's right. Sanansan's left arm. While performing his rounds, Sanansan suffered a debilitating injury to his arm that effectively ended his tenure as a warrior. It was this arm that convinced him to drink the water of life.
皮肉なものですね。新選組と近藤さんの名を世に出すため戦い続けてきたというのに、新選組の名を最も貶めたのはこの私ということになるのでしょうか。
俺もあんたも表向きはとっくに死んだことになってる人間だ。歴史に残るのはきっと頭が良くて穏やかで剣術がうまくて少し腹黒で誰よりも新選組を思ってた三男圭介の名前だけだよ。
Hearing Heisuke speak to him so encouragingly gave Sanansan a sense of inner peace, resolving the war that had waged inside of him for too long.
そうですか。それならばいいのです。先にあの世で待っていますよ。どうどうか。
A gentle smile rested easily on Sanansan's thin lips, just like how he looked when I first met him. He shut his eyes, calmly passing into the next life. Heisuke, are you alright?
結構深く刺されちまったから治るのにはもう少しかかりそうだけど。
Sit still. I'll take a look at it right away.
いやいいって。俺羅刹だから傷ならすぐに治っちまうし。
Let me clean the wounds at least, will you? Please? I wiped away the coagulated chunks of blood with a thin rag and water from my canteen. Man, did Heisuke always have to be so reckless? One of these days, it'd come back to bite him.
おい、千鶴、どうしたんだよ、泣いてんのか？
I'm not.
いや、どう見ても涙出てるじゃねえか。泣かないでくれって。
I'm not! In spite of my insistence, thick tears rolled down my face.
悪かったよ、心配かけちまって。だけどさっきはしょうがなかったろ。
I know that, but still. Heisuke was smiling beside me, jovial as ever. Having him here safe beside me, trading jokes back and forth, was as good as it could ever be.
みんなとりあえずは無事みたいね。大丈夫？おきく平気です。あともう少しすれば傷も塞がるでしょう。
How are you doing, Kazuma?
あれ式の怪我どうということはない。貴様らと一緒にするな。
こんな時までこの態度かよ。とどめを刺したくなっちまうな。
Oi, be nice. Without Kazuma, who knows what position we'd be in right now.
ああ、とりあえずこれで全部片付いたな。
It would seem so. Now that Sanansan's reign of terror was over, there was no more threat of a Fury Kingdom looming. Heisuke, what are you going to do next?
まあ、きっとなんとかなるさ。お前がそばにいてくれるんなら、三男さんみてえに狂っちまうこともねえだろうし。もし俺が狂ったら、誰かが退治してくれるって そこにいる小悪の鬼とかがな。
そんな面倒な役目ができるか。他力本願も大概にしろ。
Kazuma turned his back to us, muttering coldly under his breath.
以前耳にしたことがある。雪村光道が落ち水の改良に用いたのは東国の鬼の里、雪村家の故郷の水だとな。
What?
陸奥の水には落ち水の毒を清める効能があるらしい。その水ならばすでに羅刹となった者の毒をも消せるかもしれんな。
Kazuma, did you know all that for our sake?
その薄汚いまがい物が都に出てくると目障りだからな。人も通わぬ山奥でつまらぬ一生を終えるがいい。
東堂さんを見逃してあげるんなら素直にそう言えばいいのに。
見逃したわけではない。血に狂えばいつでも殺しに来る。
Kazuma spat on the ground, turning to walk away from us and the castle.
ちょっと待てよ風間。
まだ何かあるのか。要件ならばさっさと言え。
お前最後までその態度かよ。まあいいや、一度しか言わねえからよく聞けよ。さっきの話教えてくれてありがとうよ。感謝する。
聞こえんな。もう一度言え。
Oh God.
嘘つけ。今絶対聞こえてただろ。二度と言わねえよ。
It seemed that not even fighting together for their lives could keep Kazuma and Heisuke from bickering. Watching the two of them exchange playful banter coaxed tears of joy from all of us. And afterwards...
千鶴さん、あなたはこれからどうなさるおつもりですか？風間が言っていた通り、雪村の里へ。
I think that's where we're off to next. Maybe I'll pay the Shinsengumi a visit first, though.
そう。じゃあ時々遊びに行くわね。鬼と羅刹が仲良く暮らしている里に。
Please feel free to come by whenever you'd like. You're always welcome. Following the Battle of Sendai, we traded our goodbyes, leaving behind the castle and all of its hurtful memories in our wake. (1868) August. Once we made our way back to the Shinsengumi from Sendai, Hijikata-san warmly welcomed Heisuke and me, although he'd never say it to our faces. Lines of worry stretched across his forehead, and judging by his enthusiasm to greet us, it seemed like he'd been waiting to hear what had become of us. As we recounted the events back to him, Hijikata-san was receptive, taking all of it in with a gentle smile.
平助、雪村、大義だった。辛い役目を負わせちまったな。
いや、あれはきっと俺がやらなきゃならねえことだったんだ。俺も一歩間違えば三男さんと同じ道を歩んでたかもしれねえから。
Then Heisuke glanced over at me. I didn't go mad thanks to you. Or at least that's what he said through his eyes. Following a pause, Hijikata-san's tone dropped low, his voice hovering barely above a murmur.
三男さんは最後どうだった？
Well, I think he reverted back to his original self as he edged closer to his death. He fondly recalled a memory, thinking back to the days when he was only human.
そうか。
Hijikata-san lowered his gaze to the floor, perhaps reflecting upon happier times he'd share with Sanan-san. What stuck out as poignant to me was Sanan-san's memory of the Shinsengumi's early days, thinking back on how loyally he served both Kondo-san and the group. The guilt and sorrow Hijikata-san must have felt for ordering the death of his longtime friend was unimaginable. However, there wasn't much time to linger on the past. For now, Heisuke and I had one last journey to make.
それでさ、土方さん、俺たちが別行動をとってた間、戦況はどうなってたんだ？
それがな。
According to Hijikata-san, they were on the losing end of a devastating war, which only seemed to worsen day by day. Though he could only rely on both Saito and Shimada to lead their troops, mounting offensive charges that worked successfully in their favor. Other divisions weren't so lucky. So what does that mean for the rest of you now?
戦ってるのは俺たちだけじゃねえからな。今は何とも言えねえ。
Although he would never admit it, it seemed like Hijikata-san was at the end of his rope, desperately searching for recruits to strengthen the numbers. Hijikata-san snuck a glance at Heisuke, and perhaps he was even considering asking him to join, even if Heisuke could have turned to ash on the battlefield. However, our minds had already been made up. Hijikata-san, I need to speak with you. You see...
待てよ、千鶴。その先を話すのは俺の役目だ。そうだろ。
Heisuke turned from looking at me to facing Hijikata-san, carrying a look of certainty in his eyes.
土方さん、今新選組を取り巻く状況がどれだけ厳しいのかは俺も分かってるつもりだ。だけどそれでも言わせてくれ。俺は新選組を抜ける。こいつと一緒に。
We'd expected Hijikata-san to throw a fit or roll his eyes and call us idiots, but instead, he sat quietly. Kondo-san, Okita, Yamazaki-san, Inoue, Harada, and Nagakura. In such a short span of time, Hijikata-san was forced to say goodbye to so many of his old friends.
新選組を抜けるか。刀を捨てるつもりか、平助。
ああ、俺はずっと戦い続けてきた。この国のために戦って死ぬのが武士だって思ってたから。羅刹になってからはもっとそうだった。戦うこと自体が俺の生きる意味みたいな記載してたよ。俺は戦うために生き返ったんだ。戦うためだけに存在してるんだってさ。
Heisuke shut his eyes in reflection, quietly turning the events of the past few years over in his mind. He took a deep breath and opened his eyelids before turning to face me again.
でもこいつと一緒にいて分かったんだ。俺は人間じゃなくなったけど、戦う以外にもできることはあるんだって。
そうか。そういうからには何か目的でもあるんだな、お前ら。
We're going to head for the village where I was born, the Yukimura village. Supposedly there may be a wellspring hidden within the mountains that could cure Heisuke's condition.
俺が生き延びる方法があるかもしれねえんなら全部試してみてんだ。今の俺は戦って死ぬんじゃなく 生きたいんだ。こいつと一緒に。
Ichikata-san shut his eyes in contemplation, thinking quietly to himself as I twiddled my fingers. It was a lofty request, one that I anticipated was too nuanced to answer quickly. After a prolonged silence, Ichikata-san opened his eyelids again, turning to ask me a question.
雪村、お前もそれで納得してるのか?
Absolutely. I nodded firmly, staring back at Ichikata-san with confidence. I feel comfortable enough to say this now, but when I'd first encountered the Shinsengumi, all of you seemed so intimidating to me. But the more I came to spend time with each one of you, I began to understand. All of you laughed, cried, and fought together, weathering life's challenges as one unit. Before I knew it, the Shinsengumi had carved a very special place in my heart. But what I feel for Heisuke surpasses all of that. And because of how strongly these emotions run through me, I want to settle down with him. Together, we could search for a way to improve his health, no matter how long it takes.
俺も
Heisuke was going to expand upon what I had said, but Ichikata-san interjected almost immediately.
平助、雪村。さっきの報告に間違いがねえんなら、鬼どもがこの戦に関わることはねえんだな。
We believe so.
鬼は手を引いて、羅刹隊は滅んだか。じゃあこれ以上お前らがこの戦に関わる必要なんてねえよ。平助は油小路で死んだことになった。雪村に至っては元より大使でも何でもねえ。好きなようにどこへでも行っちまえ。
Hijikata-san wore a relaxed expression, speaking with a plain tone of voice. I suppose this was his send-off. On paper, it seemed impersonal, but for us, it meant so much more. Despite the imminent threat of war still hovering just beyond the horizon, Hijikata-san sat with us, sending us off warmly in his own reserved way. When Hijikata-san nodded with the go-ahead,
土方さん、今までありがとうございました。
Arigato. No other words captured how we felt as immediately. Wow. So this really is goodbye then, huh? It was becoming real, meaning that we would have to bid farewell to our entire lives thus far for whatever our journey would take us. For Heisuke, who had served the Shinsengumi for far longer than I did, I could only imagine what had been going through his mind at the time. Peeking from the corner of my eye, I took a glimpse at him, noticing that he had already been staring in my direction and our eyes locked together. What's the matter?
なあ、最後にもう一度だけ聞いときたくてさ。
Ask me what?
千鶴、お前後悔しないか?
It was a heavy question to which I wondered if I'd ever truly know the answer. But for now, of course I won't. Because the only priority I have is spending the rest of my life with you, Heisuke. Come what may, no matter what happens beyond this point, I could never regret this decision. I gave him my purest, widest smile. Deep in my heart, I knew that happiness without you isn't happiness at all.
そっか。まあそう答えてくれるとは思ってたんだけどさ。やっぱお前の口から聞きたくて。
I guess there are some things that mean more when they're said in person.
ああ。実は俺もあるんだ。今まで言う機会は何度もあったけど、はっきり言えなかった言葉が。
Heisuke went suddenly quiet. His puppy dog eyes quivered, gazing into my soul. His body shifted timidly, like he was still mustering the courage to tell me what he had wanted to say. And then he whispered softly into my ear the words that I had wanted to hear more than anything.
千鶴、俺、お前のことが好きだ。お前以外の女なんて目に入らないぐらい。他のどんな相手とも比べられねえぐらい好きだ。ありがとうな。俺を選んでくれて、こうして一緒に来てくれて。
Hearing the words from his mouth made me feel like I'd been lifted into the sky to rest upon a bed of clouds. He was so thoughtful and sweet. I couldn't help but shed a tear. All those moments I'd spent watching him suffer the torture of bloodlust. Even with the tumult agonizing his body and mind, I wanted him to know how I would have done anything to support him. And now, all of those moments were validated.
おい、千鶴、どうしてまた泣くんだよ。俺泣かせるようなこと言ってねえだろ。
No, sorry, I just... What you just said touched me so. You have no idea how much that means to me. Heisuke inched his fingers to my hair nervously, gently stroking the threads in a playful manner. Then he looked me back in the eye.
お前が喜んでくれるなら、これから先いくらでも言ってやるから。だからもう泣くなよ。な。
The next day, we started our goodbyes. Oh my god, how long is this chapter going on for? Time went by in a flash as we spent the day biding each of our friends in the Shinsengumi farewell. My heart grew heavy, realizing there were so many members who left an impression on me that I won't be able to greet, but our departure couldn't be delayed any longer than it already had been.
そんじゃ行くか、千鶴。
Let's go. As we exited the compounds, a full moon dazzled brilliantly in the sky, illuminating the entirety of the path ahead of us. A sign of good fortune, hopefully. Considering Heisuke's condition, it was pressing for us to leave by midnight to cover the most ground, meaning most of the men were likely asleep by then. We had figured this to be the easiest option given that, for all intents and purposes, Heisuke and I essentially no longer existed in the Shinsengumi. It gave us the perfect opportunity to perform a discreet exit, thinking no one would see us off when...
よー、二人とも。
Our hearts skipped a beat again.
遅かったな。待ちわびたぞ。 水臭いですよ、お二人とも。見送りぐらいさせてください。
This is bringing a tear to my eye. Oh god. 土方さん、斉藤さん、島田。
東堂さんも雪村先輩も白状だな。俺たちに挨拶なしで出て行っちまうつもりだったのかよ。
お二人とも今まで本当にお世話になりました。
なんだよみんなして。忙しいんじゃなかったのか。
確かに暇ではない。だが戦友の門出を見送るぐらいはしてもよかろ
う。お二人が仙台から戻ってきた後、会えずじまいでしたからね。無事で本当に何よりでした。そしてお二人ともどうかこれからも無事でいてください。
Same for all of you too.
そうだよ。戦場に残るのはそっちの方なんだからさ。
確かに我々はまだしばらく戦から抜けられそうにありませんね。
だがあんたたちは十分に戦った。敵と己自身ともな。そろそろ戦いを終えてもいい頃だろう。幸せになる。
We will. Thank you for everything.
言われなくても分かってるよ。ありがとな。
Ichigata-san silently observed us banter with his men. He looked more like a chaperone than a participant in the send-off party, offering nothing to say.
それじゃあ行くか。
We waved to our friends, turning our backs when...
達者でな。
My ear perked as I heard a message carried by the tender midnight winds. Ever since that fateful evening, when I first encountered the Shinsengumi, my life underwent so much change. It was somewhat of a sinking feeling to think about how this period of my life had flown by me, and that I may never see any of these people ever again. But Heisuke. I loved almost every second of my time with the Shinsengumi, and all of the faces along the way. Memories of our time came flooding back to me. In spite of their reputation, the Shinsengumi navigated pressures felt by the shogunate and other domains with aplomb, working so hard to spread their name. They even overcame internal strife as new members entered the fold. At one point, Heisuke left the Shinsengumi to join the Guardians of the Imperial Tomb. I remember the haunting scene of Heisuke shivering in a pool of blood after the Aburano Koji incident, which led to him drinking the water of life. How he triumphed over the former colonel of the Shinsengumi in a one-on-one duel. It was difficult to believe that all of this and more had occurred in the span of 4.5 years.
俺もだ。あそこで過ごしたことは多分一生忘れねえと思う。
We lived to tell the tale, and at last, we could smile knowing that we withstood all these trials together, walking hand in hand towards our bright future. I met the Shinsengumi, tense and fearful under the sheen of ominous moonlight, but this time, this moonlight was soft, glimmering above us as we waved our friends in the distance goodbye. Summer 1868. Final chapter. Oh. As we traveled a little further, word made its way through the grapevine to us. Following Sana-san's occupation of Sendai, the domain went into chaos before eventually collapsing. Suffering the loss of its key member, the Northern Alliance had no means of recovering, and the country ushered into a new age of government and imperialism. The war reduced the lives of thousands to whispers that vanished into the roar of bombastic cannon fire. Although the country was going to experience a period of tumultuous change, we were safely out of reach within the rural pastures we call home. In the place of my birth, Yukimura Village, time ticked slowly over meadows as far as the eye could see. Heisuke's body too had experienced so much stress and change. The fresh bodies of water and crisp clean air did wonders, it seemed, to slowly reverse the effects of his affliction so that he could live comfortably. Over time, his episodes grew further and further apart from each other. And soon, before we knew it, he was able to bask the pleasant rays of sunshine once more. Every now and then, I'd catch him sprawled across the tall grass, napping under the shade of an old tree, sleeping soundly like he hadn't a care in the world. Soon it became a daily ritual, his head resting peacefully on top of my lap as he dozed off. The weather was often so fair and temperate that I often caught myself falling asleep right next to him, leaning back onto the tree trunk as I held him close. This day was another one of those days, the breeze tickling my cheek as I fondly remembered our past. I remember being in the common hall, Kondo-san and Ichikata-san standing in the front, loudly gesticulating. Okita and Saito-san stood just behind them. Oh no. Nagakura and Harada would joke off to the side. And the rest of the men stood proudly around them. And of course, I was slow to open my eyelids, sensing the glint of sunlight between my thinned eyes. My smile carried from my dreams into my waking state, opening my eyes to the serenity around me. Did I fall asleep?
ああ、すっげえ気持ちよさそうに寝てた。だからしばらく寝顔でも眺めてようかなって思ってさ。
Normally, I would have rushed to tidy up my hair, but for some reason, I wasn't bothered by it at all. I turned lightly, nestling more comfortably in his lap, and looked at him as I muttered aloud. I dreamt of the past. I saw Kondo-san, and Ichikata-san, and everyone else too. I can't recall. Part of me wants to say I saw you there at first, But somewhere in the middle, you left. I fluttered my hands upwards, as if chasing after the wisp of a dream floating above my head. Heisuke kindly caught my hand, holding it tightly. His hands were so small yet so firm. They were his, and I loved their every touch.
大丈夫。俺はお前のそばにいるよ。日が落ちても、月が昇っても、いつか別れる日が来ても、それでも俺はお前のそばに居続けるから。
Okay. Okay.